if you don't know enough about these tools and the ecosystem and AI fundamentals, it's gonna be really hard to figure out who does and doesn't. I would rather have really high potential and still tons of energy and on the upslope of the career versus somebody who's got 10 years and they're really super established. Get away from hiring on vibes.
Welcome to Human First, the go-to-market hiring show. I'm your host, Danielle Parker, head of marketing at Captivate Talent. One of the most common briefs we hear from founders and revenue leaders right now is some version of, we want someone who's AI native. And when we push on what that actually means, what it looks like in an interview, how you tell the real thing from someone who just knows the right words, most people don't have a clear answer yet. Today's guest does. Kyle Norton is CRO at Owner.com, one of the faster-growing SaaS companies in the restaurant tech space, and he's been building and stress testing an approach to AI fluency assessment and team structure that goes well beyond the talking points. Kyle, welcome. Well, thank you so much for joining us to record some thoughts on this topic. And I just want to dive right in. I mean, you're one of the most well-known voices in the space talking about AI adoption in revenue teams. We've talked about this before. There's this comparison that gets made a lot right now that using AI occasionally is starting to look like using the internet occasionally, maybe back in 1995 or whenever the internet started becoming a big thing, and that it's table stakes now. It's not a differentiator. So do you buy that framing? When was your aha moment that was this is the next big thing we need to invest, or I need to invest personally?
Totally agree with the framing. I actually have a slide that says basically that I've been presenting since SaaStr last year, so May of 2025. Yeah, it is absolutely table stakes to be in the tools pretty constantly. And I think folks understanding what is required versus what gives you, what would make you feel more advanced and seen as more advanced is sometimes tough to untangle, because people are like, oh yeah, I'm in ChatGPT all the time. It's well, everybody is. And so I think there's a few levels. There's using the chat interface of any of these tools of your choice. It's sort of step one. Step two is maybe you start building a few custom gems or custom GPTs that you use for a specific scenario over and over. Then you have people that start to adopt sort of systems like Clay, Make, N8N to power more advanced workflows and start to webhook into other places, pulling in data from more sources. And then you now have emerging sort of a big group of people, myself included, who predominantly work out of Claude Code. I use it in Terminal because I was in there before the web app was as great as it is now. If I was starting again, I would just keep everything in Cowork and Claude Code in the desktop app so that it's more virtually available. I also have an OpenClaw setup, which is a bit of a mirror for my Claude Code terminal. It accesses the same skills, the same repos, the same context. And so it is less of the full agentic replacement for a whole ton of stuff. And it's more of a virtual access point for a bunch of things that I've built in my terminal that don't work when my laptop is closed. And so my solution was to host that virtually. And so that is, I think, a rough understanding of the sophistication ladder. And then you can be then there's over and above. You could be vibe coding your own internal apps, building workflows for yourself. There's a lot of places where you can go with it. But for go-to-market folks, I would say that's a pretty reasonable map. And if you are not doing even custom GPTs, gems, or Claude projects, you're way behind. Or behind where I think people should reasonably expect to be today to consider themselves benefiting and carving an advantage based on AI. Certainly you should be exploring custom skills, Claude skills, and using Claude Code to solve more sophisticated problems. And Cowork is again, because I'm more of a terminal guy, I haven't really been a full Cowork adopter, more out of habit than anything. But that starts to get into okay, now you're differentiating yourself from a personal use case perspective.
Just out of curiosity, where you said you were, using Terminal before Claude Claude Code and Cowork came out. But where did you like really start to learn? Like, what resources are you looking at? What do you recommend to like your folks?
It's just Twitter and YouTube, to be honest.
I know, I think I have like 10,000 threads bookmarked on like just AI stuff.
Yeah, and now you can just take that thread and dump it into your claw or into your terminal and just be like, hey, like make these changes. So yeah, it's just Twitter and YouTube, and mostly like Twitter is my gateway into YouTube. I find the interesting videos through my Twitter feed, and there's a bunch of interesting people to follow, and maybe we can put this in the show notes. But honestly, once you start following and bookmarking a bunch of AI stuff, your whole feed, the For You feed, I find to be much more compelling than my like following feed, interestingly enough. And that just gives you like all of the most cutting edge, most interesting stuff. Because, we've gone through a bunch of these trends. We've gone through these trends of, like everybody really started to gravitate towards Claude maybe in like Q4. And then there was this open claw explosion. And then now like people are starting to fracture into Cowork, and there's like Karpathy and Elon Musk declaring the singularity is upon us. And so this whole auto research thing, I haven't done any of the auto research. Like that's not as relevant for me, but like, you just, what is hottest and most current is only found on X. Like you would not understand or know that those things are happening if you only lived on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook.
And you're right. It's I feel like that algorithm on Twitter especially has gotten a lot better lately at like as soon as you show interest in something, it's like immediately like you're going to see everything about this that you've ever wanted to see.
Yeah, you have to be really careful that you don't like open a politics article or share it with a friend, because then that becomes your feed pretty quickly.
I know, or I've just like clicked on something out of curiosity. I'm like, "Oh, what's this?" And I'm like, "I did not want to see that topic 50,000 times today. I'm good."
Yeah. Yeah, that algo is very strong.
Yeah. But if you're interested in AI and you want to find those great people, click around and, have your feed be educating instead of doom scrolling, I guess.
Yeah, it's great. And I think they made some change recently to the algo where it really prioritizes X articles. And so there's so much interesting stuff being written in long form now on X, which I find to be like quite a nice change. So that's where I go. And I have been following this so closely since that first ChatGPT moment that I've like been able to ride the wave of all of these new things. If you were coming into it from a cold start now, I would imagine that would all be extremely overwhelming. And you'd probably want to start with some of the basics on YouTube. Like there's these 2 3-hour long Anja Karpathy videos that I typically recommend for folks that explains like the basics of how an LLM works, and like the difference between pre-training and post-training, just like core concepts, like what is a token, like the basic things that I think are important to grasp if you really want to understand how these things work in the wild. And so like that's a really good place to start. And Karpathy's got like so many cool things on his YouTube. He's giving away so much amazing information on X. Just getting up to speed, I'm sure, would be like a little bit of a challenge.
Kind of shifting into something we've talked about before, and I think you have a really interesting perspective on is when you're interviewing someone for like a senior go-to-market role, how does AI fluency actually come up? Like what separates a genuine answer from a polished one? What are you asking? Where are you digging in? What are the kind of the red flags where you're like, you don't know what you're talking about?
So my views on this have changed. Let me answer this in two parts. My views on like how much AI fluency is needed in leadership roles has evolved. I think anybody senior, it is a really important requirement. And you have to understand how these tools work and be in it day to day, or else you just don't understand the art of the possible to be able to spot opportunities to use that in your business and understand like, where is AI going to be the most helpful versus the least helpful? Okay, if it's a consistent pattern of input and output and there's a bunch of data to train this workflow on, then like awesome application of AI. If this thing is like quite different every time and there's a lot of creativity and judgment involved, like don't apply AI to that. And I think you only really get a firm feel for it and develop taste for it unless you've tried to do a bunch of stuff yourself. And so but how far down in the organization does that follow? Because we have taken a very centralized approach to AI and GTM. We've got multiple people in our applied AI team. They're extremely technical, and they partner really, really closely with people on the ground. That like they'll be in Toronto, sitting next to our sales team, working on stuff, iterating, shipping it, working with the reps and the manager. And so the managers don't necessarily need to have a ton of AI fluency. I would like them to, and I'm encouraging them to. But in terms of producing things that move the business forward, they're not going to be building those things. Maybe they build some of their own workflows to make their day-to-days more productive and more efficient. But in terms of building the scoring models or the AI pre-call research, like the managers are participating, but this is all centrally built because these central people are not just like 50% better at this stuff or twice as good. It's like an order of magnitude better outputs from an expert who spends 40 hours on this AI project over a couple or over like a week or two versus somebody trying to side a desk this. It's a very different skill set. Now that these tools are as sophisticated as they are, what you need is quite different. And so we have a very centralized approach. So in hiring managers, I haven't been as insistent on AI literacy compared to somebody senior. If you're senior and you're making decisions for a business unit or you're in a leverage role, like you're in RevOps now, like you need to be like AI pilled to be in RevOps at owner because it's just like it's totally night and day.
And what are you asking? How do you find those like AI pilled people and you're like, okay, like you get it. You've said, before that you can get like you have this like spidey sense almost, but how did you develop that? Like what are you looking for?
Just being in it myself, and don't find this advice to be very helpful. Unfortunately, like my advice is like you should just know. Like if you don't know enough about these tools and the ecosystem and AI fundamentals, it's gonna be really hard to figure out who does and doesn't. You're gonna get hoodwinked pretty easily, but like it jumps off the page. One of the questions I asked is like, so tell me what you've built using AI for the business, and then like tell me about some stuff you've just built for yourself. Like what are your favorite day-to-day productivity workflows? And people who are AI pilled are just like, oh, I did this and I did that and then I did these things, and I like have to cut them off because they're so excited and they've got so many things to say and they just really want to get into it with you. And I'm excited about it too. So I could easily spend, half of an interview on it if I wasn't being cognizant. And so I think it is pretty easy to spot, but if you don't know much about it, it's really like, somebody can just like spin yarn and use a bunch of big buzzwords and you don't know. So you got to be in it. Or if you don't have that expertise, somebody in the interview process needs to. You should be stress testing this with an expert that, can separate fact from fiction there. So that would be the other way to do it.
Yeah, that's a really good insight having someone like sit in the process that is AI pilled themselves and knows how to find someone else who is. Jumping back into something you just mentioned about your applied AI team, the centralized applied AI function at owner.com. I think that's really interesting and it's not something we've seen a ton of. It's not the norm. So walk me through the thinking behind that at the company level, at the go-to-market level, and why was that decision made? And have you seen anything go wrong when teams kind of try that decentralized approach?
So you'll have to come back to the second part of the question, but in terms of how we built the team, so we raised our Series C at the beginning of last year, and this was the first role that I put into the plan in terms of like, okay, like we're gonna have a little bit more budget to work with. We want to grow more aggressively, and this was the first thing that I put in was like, I need somebody dedicated to this because we had gotten a ton of benefit from our AI investments, whether it's stuff that we had bought, like Momentum, Avara, Trig, OneMind. Yeah, there's a bunch of these really data lane, a bunch of these really high impact production use cases. And then we had built some stuff on our own that was like great, V1s of stuff. And we just wanted more of it. And so our VP of BizOps built a bunch of this stuff on his own, just like side of desk, and the scoring models, and we've got this like really interesting churn analysis workflow. It was pretty clear, like, all right, if we did more of these things, like it's going to be great, and with the expectation that the models are only getting better, like literally every single month. And so we were in the interview process. It was that role was originally going to sit in RevOps, but it became clear that like the better person to own it day to day was this BizOps leader, because he was the most technical and proficient, and we felt like that would be the best manager for this person. And so for us, it sits in our BizOps and data team. I think that is unique to our talent, our leadership talent. It could be elsewhere. I know other companies who are really successful have it in their engineering org or within RevOps. It just depends on who's going to be the best vanguard for this organization. And this wasn't our idea, like out of nowhere. I had taken cues from Stevie Case at Vanta. She had a really successful earlier investment in an applied AI individual, and she was expanding her team to 3 by the time we got our first ramp we had spent some time with, and I was really compelled. They had a big team, and really compelled by what they were doing. And so I was inspired by that. And this is another piece of, going back to your question, how do you stay current with a bunch of it? I also try to have a lot of conversations with CROs that are doing interesting things with AI. I mean, the only reason I started my podcast is basically so that I could get 90 minutes a week with somebody that I have a lot of respect for and can learn from. And so, that's been a great ecosystem to pull from. So yeah, that's sort of how we thought about building it. And we're only putting more headcount into that team now.
And was it originally, like you said, as soon as you got that Series C, you were like, I need this. Was it originally like just for kind of go-to-market functions, revenue functions, or is it expanded to like all areas of the company now?
That individual is still basically dedicated to sales. That was part of the deal. Hey, like I'll move the budget over, but like let's have him totally sales focused. We have another leader that is focused on the growth function, and then we've got people. There's an individual who is the director for BizOps for our CS and support teams, and he has de facto become this person internally. Like he learned a lot and then raced ahead, and so he's building his own agents and workflows, not as like a typical applied AI person, but now in profile, like he is an applied AI guy, and so building workflows to analyze every single churn, read all of the information, summarize it, publish it in a channel, do these like big monthly churn reviews, all AI powered. And, we're building a churn prediction model. Like there's a bunch of this stuff. So that individual came in as, he was an IC, like just like an IC BizOps guy. And then he was a manager and now a director, like very rapidly. And he's so productive because of obviously a very sharp guy, but also extraordinarily productive because of his use of the tools to make himself more effective. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go find, like a PhD AI person and like that might not actually be the right fit. We really like want business acumen at the same time as technical proficiency. And so you can go from like Nally, business acumen, learn the technical piece, or you can take very technical. Hopefully we can see some of the business acumen already, but then you can like layer that in because you absolutely need those two things working together.
So that kind of is a good lead into the next question of like rep these days, especially with how you have your org set up. You don't necessarily need them to be AI native. Maybe they do have a little bit of that business acumen. They can grow into the role, and you're building the tooling to hand it to them. What do you actually hire for at different levels in your org now? For from BDRs to AEs to directors, what are you looking at?
So we've gone through a pretty big evolution on this over the last 12 to 16 months. Our original approach to AE and BDR hiring was like, just go hire President's Club performers from similar types of companies, restaurant tech, vertical SaaS, selling to blue collar. And so we wanted, for our BDRs, we wanted to hire like top performing BDRs, and we just paid them top of market. And we obviously have like a really strong employer brand, and I have like a very strong sales brand, which helps and is like, not totally replicable for other people listening to this. But we were just like, let's just go get the best people. And you can only do that if you raised a bunch of money and you've got the profile. But that was our approach. And then we've moved to a much earlier career approach. So we went from remote to hiring fully in person. We're 5 days a week in Toronto, pulling mostly from, the top business schools in Canada, GTA really specifically. And because we felt like we had the training and enablement program to take somebody from scratch. And the earlier you get people in their career, the higher potential individual you can go get, and you can train them the exact way you want to do it. And so now, I don't know, 80% of our new sales hires are essentially coming straight out of college, from the very best programs in Canada, with like incredible backgrounds. And our TA team told me this recently, like the acceptance rate at owner is 3 times more difficult than the acceptance rate at Harvard, which is fun, because we have so much candidate volume. And that's obviously like pretty unique to us, but it means that we can go attract these like really amazing kids or people, young people, and train them up, and they're doing awesome. Like the energy, the like pace of growth, and how much like drive and passion there is like really exciting to see. And we like move them up the org chart as fast as we can. I really want to get as many of these folks in AE seats as we can. And it's obviously competitive to get those roles. But being able to build the organization from the ground up, we found to be like, quite a big advantage.
So you're finding now more that it's, you have a new AE role, you're really promoting someone from within versus going out trying to find someone, or is that still the case for certain roles, or is it mostly because you've invested in this level of training at the very beginning?
It depends. Like we still hire externally as well. And those external hires are they still fit that other profile where like they were the number 1, number 2 person in their company previously, but they see this as an opportunity to really like springboard their career. And even from like only okay companies, we've found incredible talent, because they've learned the craft of sales, selling something more difficult, and they come here and they get paired with an world-class product, and they just like they rip. And I really want to find the DNA. So they have to be the top performer from where they were. Every single rep we hire was like President's Club in their previous place. But I want to see the intellectual horsepower. I want to see the drive, resilience, history of excellence, coachability. Those intangibles are incredibly important for us. And then we bring them in and put them through our program, and they take off. So I would say we're a little more than 50-50 internal promotes today. It depends on our classes being ready, but these whole cohorts of locally hired SDRs straight out of school, they're all graduating to sort of AE readiness over the next couple of months. And we'll see how that shifts. I don't think you want a complete echo chamber of only internal promotes. I think supplementing with some external talent here and there is always great. Our management team is about 50-50. I would say the 2 directors were promoted from manager here. There's a bunch of managers who were promoted from IC, then some external hires. So it's a mix.
One thing you said that was interesting that we see a lot of is, find this okay company, they're the top rep there, because it is more of an uphill battle when, you don't have the brand recognition as much as someone like an owner does. We see a lot of founders or, CROs, sometimes different revenue leaders kind of saying, no, we need someone from like the top company at this place. Like they're the only person who's going to be good. Have you always kind of taken that mindset, or was there like a shift where you're like, okay, like, yeah, this kind of maybe lesser known company is a great place to find these top tier reps?
I have always erred on the side of potential over previous performance. I want to see a history of excellence. Like I want to see that you were a top BDR and a top, SMB AE. And, in high school, you were the valedictorian, and then you were the head of your student society in university. Like I want to see this pattern over a longer period of time. But then I would rather have like really high potential and still tons of energy and on the upslope of the career, versus somebody who's, got 10 years and they're really like super established. We actually have not had a ton of success with that profile at owner. And I think like our pace is a piece of it. Like it's super high pace. And sometimes when you've been like a 10-year experienced rep, you're cruising at that point because you got an established book of business, your current company, you get all the good deals coming to you because you're the tenured rep. So those reps haven't worked out as frequently here. Sometimes it's worked out great. So we're obviously not against it, but it needs to be paired. Like it needs to be paired with still that learner's mentality. Like they have to still be wanting to learn new things. And we have a bunch of ways to assess that in the interview process. I'm not as picky on like, oh, I need all of these years of experience. I just want to see, do you have the craft, the hustle, the smarts, the learning motor, and the effort? And if you have those things, then we can teach you a lot of the rest of it. Because we've done the hard work to build what I think is a world-class enablement program to take people from like decent sales craft to world-class.
What does the interview process look like? How do you assess for those things? I always find this so interesting because there's, 1,000 ways to do it and everyone believes they're efficient at it. But, as we've seen, some are not great, some are great.
And hiring is in like an interview is inherently a really poor proxy for like evidence of performance and fraught with heuristics and bias and cognitive bias. And so you're doing the best you can, and you're really trying to find every way to force yourself not to fall back to just like blind pattern recognition. And so, I really like what behavioral economics teaches us here. If you read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, it lays out a bunch of it. And he built a hiring program for the Israeli army. And like, that's where he learned a bunch of these concepts, or pioneered a bunch of these concepts. And so our interview process, I think like what helps us is it's very structured, the same interview, the same structure, the same questions in the same order. And we look for the same things. And we're specifically like with certain questions, we're specifically looking for like one thing at a time. Because what happens is, going back to Kahneman, you are subjected to the halo effect or the halo and horns effect so frequently. So if somebody is really good at one thing, it has a halo around a bunch of other criteria. And so we break down our hiring process into distinct scorecard criteria and distinct questions. And you're doing your best not to let charisma, which is a fair thing to evaluate in a sales interviewing process. You're trying to like box charisma over here and not let the fact that this person is very charismatic and built rapport, and you guys cheer for the same sports team, and so you feel this like, this affinity. It doesn't let you be distracted from, well, do I think this person is conscientious? Did they show me evidence that they are coachable? Because there's a bunch of questions specifically that target coaching. What was their history of excellence and why? Like, why were they successful? How did you unpack that? Do they love to learn? And there's, we want evidence of like, what are you learning today? What have you taught yourself recently? What's your learning habit? And again, like, it sort of jumps off the page whether or not they're BSing you or not, if you are structured. And then, like people go through the recruiter screen. And so our interview process: recruiter screen, hiring manager interview, mock call, sort of case study, which we've deprioritized in importance, and then bar raiser with me, which is just a DNA and values, an interview. I don't get into sales craft basically at all. One of the other reasons we're quite successful is like the recruiter that I've partnered with now going on 7 years across here in Shopify, Nat and I are like dialed. Like, she knows exactly what we like and what we don't like. And the feedback loop is very tight. If we start to see, a new hiring manager screen out too many folks or screen in too many folks to the next step, like we're constantly evaluating this loop. You have to spend, luckily I haven't had to do this in a bunch of time, but you have to spend the time with that recruiter to make sure that you and you and that person see the world like identically, or as close to identical as you can. And that's like interviewing together. Like Nat and I sat in a room with another recruiter back in the day, and we reviewed resumes for like 90 minutes. And I was like, I like this one because of X and Y. And I don't like this one because of A and B. And Nat and Tanis did the same thing. Like they were going through resumes and sort of calling out what they like. And I'm like, oh, but actually, I don't like this because of this reason. And then so we could calibrate, and oftentimes that doesn't happen. I think so much of our success is just doing this stuff that like people don't want to spend the time on, being so over the top about the rigor in our onboarding program and investing so many resources and having like such an attention to detail and all recording all these videos. Like, it's just a grind, and spending the time doing 90 minutes of screening resumes with a recruiter to calibrate. That's a
Yeah,
bunch of
that's a
time.
grind.
Yeah, but it's, man, is it paid off in spades.
Yeah. Thanks for walking us through that. And I'm curious, is that the same for the other functions that kind of fall under the revenue umbrella? Because you have sales. Does marketing fall under you, or do you have a
I don't
CMO
have
and then,
marketing.
but you have
Um,
customer
I have
success?
I have sales, customer onboarding, partnerships, rev ops, and enablement. Yeah, it is like different depending on roles. Like we've hired a bunch of rev ops roles, some quite technical recently, and for those roles there is more weight on a technical project, um, to stress test a bunch of that stuff. They meet more people in that journey because we need to figure out, okay, do they have the technical acumen to make great decisions and build the right infrastructure, and also do they have the right business acumen? So that's a longer hiring process. The customer onboarding hiring is basically identical to sales. We run the same process with just like a slightly different set of questions and mock assignment. We've only hired once external. The only person I hired externally uh, for partner is a VP. She was like doing advisory with us, and we're like, we want you, Tina. And we just tried to pull her in. There was no interview, but that will probably simulate somewhere in between a sales interview process and something slightly more technical.
So that leads me into another question. If you're looking at go-to-market org structures that will be competitive in the next 2 to 3 years, what's different from how most companies are built today and where people are currently making the biggest structural mistakes?
Structural mistakes in how they organize their like org chart.
Yeah, how the go-to-market org is structured. Like, what do you think it'll look like in the most competitive companies in the next like 2 to 3 years?
To be honest, I don't think that there is like a one answer to this. I think it really depends on the business and the talent and the market that you're selling into. So even just juxtapose SMB versus enterprise. If you are an SMB revenue leader, you need to be extremely systems oriented, and you need to be like data driven, and have a very like analytical approach. And so in those environments, it makes a lot of sense to have RevOps into the revenue leader, like it is here at Owner. But if you're enterprise, like there's a lot of enterprise leaders that are deal people. Like they are deal jockeys, and they haven't had to build that same systems rigor. And so reporting a VP of RevOps into that individual might not actually be the right answer there. But it totally depends. Like, what is the unique skill set of that person? Who else would this person report to? And you have to be fungible. I think in a world of AI, there is more crossover than ever. So you have to get good at working across the org chart. It can make sense to have more of these things be consolidated. Like at one point I owned the growth function at Owner, but then we hired a CMO and rolled him out into the CEO. And that made the most sense, because we'll get somebody way better if it's a CMO reporting to the CEO versus a CMO reporting to me. And like that person doesn't need my oversight anywhere near as much as a VP level person would have. And so that works for us. And so we've gone through a bunch of different org shapes, and we'll continue to iterate. I think you just have to be flexible and responsive to the needs of the customer and the business, and not get too dogmatic. about like any one answer. So it's a very much a non-answer to your question, but
No, but it makes sense, and I think the underlying kind of answer there was having the flexibility to evolve with the business and how the times are changing and what do you need to add in? How do you connect these orgs? How do you increase that kind of, not to be a corporate buzzword, but that cross-functional alignment, if you will?
yeah, like the CMO and I are tied at the hip, and we talk all the time, and we're constantly problem solving and troubleshooting, and our teams overlap tremendously. But that's just like a person thing, like Wyatt, our CMO, is a very like revenue or marketing leader. He thinks about the close one number. He doesn't ever just like over orient on the lead number blindly like you see so much of the time. And so you have to have the right people in the right place, because no amount of like cross org charting or cross functional alignment projects are going to overcome if you've got a marketing leader who like doesn't fundamentally understand how they're connected to revenue, and they're too like head in the clouds about stuff. Like it's more about the people. It's more about the people in the seats than it is the org chart, in my opinion.
That's a really good way to put it. All right, I got one more for you. For any revenue leader or founder that's listening to this and wants to take away, like one concrete step for this week, whether that's changing how they run an interview process or how they think about a role they're hiring for, the org chart, or how they structure their team, where would you tell them to start?
I think you have to get really structured in your interview process. Get away from hiring on vibes. Vibe hiring is like, you know, that candidate meets a bunch of people. Those people ask whatever questions come top of mind. And every single time they ask the candidate about their career history. So they've now repeated it 4 times, which is basically a waste of time. So get like really structured and methodical. Like interview 1 is X. So like at Shopify, it is the life story interview. It's like a very like specific Shopify. Then interview 2 is Y, and then it's Z. And then you have to have the same questions asked in the same order. There's room for ambiguity, and when you see something, you want to like unpack and sort of drill into 5 whys. But you need to be structured so that you are interviewing and comparing like apples to apples. So I've asked you the same questions, and I can compare you and start to build a data set and a pattern recognition over the questions. And and then I go back to them a lot. Like when we make a mishire, I'm always like, what the heck did I miss? And I go back to my interview notes and I look at, okay, like that's the reason this person didn't work out. What did I write about that specific topic in the interview notes so that I can calibrate? But you need to have this like structure and rigor. And once you have that, then you can also start to understand the data in more detail. What of these scorecard criteria are most highly correlated to in-role success? What managers are good at identifying those scorecard criteria versus not? Because once that person's on your team for 3 or 6 months, you know who is resilient and hardworking and coachable and has a learning motor. And so you can cross-reference. You can be like, okay, like these 3 managers had this person as a 4 out of 4, and these 2 managers had them as a 2, and then they ended up being a -1. So what did these people who scored them a 2 see that the other people don't, and how do you close that loop? But none of it works unless you have this foundation of a really clear job description, a really clear set of hiring criteria. Like these are the specific criteria that we are assigning scores to, and you can make it a weighted criteria even better. And then the same questions in the same order across the same sets of interviews. And then you can divide and conquer. You can be like, okay, Brandon is going to assess for this, Kyle's going to assess for this, Danielle's going to assess for this. You can get more data if you're not all asking the same things and overlapping. Some overlap is good because then you can triangulate, but you want to avoid it as much as possible. So I would say that's like the best starting point.
Yeah, I would 100% agree getting away from like the vibe hiring, because then you just don't really have that data to go back, or it was a different process with different people and you can't do that analysis of like, what did I miss? Or like, where are the patterns with my top performers that have been here for years that are getting promoted, and how can I find more of them?
There's a lot of vibe hiring going on in sales in particular. And what you end up doing is just hiring a bunch of charismatic people who are good at building rapport. You're like, man, this person's Salesforce is a total mess, and like they're like so disorganized. Well, did you have conscientiousness or organizational skills on your hiring scorecard? And did you have specific questions to identify that? Okay, then you shouldn't be surprised that you have a bunch of like charismatic, disorganized people on your team.
Yeah, because you're vibe hiring.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you, Kyle. Thanks for joining us today. Like, so appreciate your time and your insights. We're definitely going to drop where people can find you, listen to your podcast, and all of that kind of good stuff. So thanks again.
Okay, appreciate it, and thanks for the invite.
This episode with Kyle is exactly the kind of conversation we set the show up to have. Specific, honest, and genuinely useful. The framing around centralized versus decentralized AI transformation alone is something I think a lot of revenue leaders need to sit with. If you're listening and you're in the middle of trying to figure out how to hire for AI fluency, or whether you even should right now, I hope this gives you a clearer place to start. You can find links to all of Kyle's work and owner.com in the show notes. If this episode was useful, please like, subscribe, and share it with a founder or revenue leader who's wrestling with the same questions. That's exactly who we made the show for. We'll see you next time on Human First.